You need a she shed. Well, I laugh because, you know, Susan from All About Blank, she's one of the vendors that's down there. That's what she did. She bought the house right next door to hers, so that that's where her business is in that house. So.
Great idea.
I started out in a spare bedroom and then took 2 spare bedrooms. Then I moved into the family room. And then I moved it into the living
Hey,
room
Miss Jane.
and the dining room. Oh my gosh. I almost bought the building across the street, which was used by the local seamstress tailor. I almost bought that, and then husband said, "No, we're doing okay here." But I tell you, if that building comes up for sale again.
Yeah. My husband just completed a room for me downstairs because he got tired of the creep into all the other
Into the other space.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that kind of happens.
Yeah, and I still use one of the spare bedrooms along with the dining room and the living room.
Yeah. Yeah, my house is the open concept where you walk in and you can see like
Everything.
everything. So he would be
No
like,
hidden space.
Yeah, no hidden space, and he was like, basement.
At least you have a basement. But it took him years.
It took him years to do it, yeah.
Done.
It's
And he's
finally
a builder.
Yeah. When the
Oh, well, that's
pandemic-
just the law. That's the way it happens.
It's the cobbler, you know.
Yep.
The cobbler's kids, they're always the shoes.
When the pandemic hit, I was like, you're doing this now. Lowe's is open, you go get all the supplies.
Those pens are much fun. Yeah. So you can do sublimation without a printer. You all got a freebie in your bags.
Yeah.
I didn't know what it was. I didn't know what it was.
Yeah. Now with an iron, it takes almost 5 minutes with an iron.
Well, at home I have the heat press.
Yeah. Well, because you have to have steady heat, and if you have holes in your iron, that's not even heat, so you have to keep moving it. And you got to get the highest heat setting that you can get. So.
And a home iron is about 4 minutes.
Yeah. So it takes a little longer.
So we have to get a heat press.
Yeah.
We've been talking about it for a while.
Well, I bought a handheld press, and it's better than my iron.
Yeah.
You know, but
Oh, this is for another class. Not
they're fun.
Well, I've been looking to do sublimation weekend board books, so
I'm going to want to see this.
it would be worth it.
Are you in my embellishment class?
Want to say yes?
Okay, because I'm showing them there.
The printing.
Oh, well, then I'll see.
That's on Saturday and Sunday.
It's printing on white, so you print it out on white piece of paper with this special ink, and then you press it into it, and it makes the print onto the fabric. Yeah. It has to be. Is it a polyester fabric?
It has to be polyester.
Yeah, it has to be white color.
It- What's that? Oh, yes, he got me. We're live. He told me that the camera's on me and it's working, so I can't say anything bad. No.
I have it on Sunday.
Excellent.
I also have your design analysis. I'm really looking forward to it.
That's probably one of my most fun classes is a design analysis, just because I did editing for so long because digitizing just didn't appeal to me. So there's just so many things that you know about it. You can tell by design by just looking at it, you know. So. And of course that doesn't intermesh with once you know what you're looking at, now you know when you're creating something what you're looking at. So even though they tell you embroidery isn't WYSIWYG, you know, what you see on the screen is now it's going to stitch. You can train your brain to see it.
Just like that, just like that.
The one that was all the way on the right is sublimation.
Right.
See, instantly what is and isn't going to work yet.
Exactly.
Yeah, but I think that they put something over the top all year.
And I, one of the things that I really
Yeah, I
like
don't know how they did it, but that was
some of the classes
that's
was
the
have different instructors.
Uh-huh.
Because everybody has a different approach.
Yes.
And I'm saying one reason here and one.
I'd imagine it's bad.
To make it your own.
My daughter with something behind it.
That's the way it goes.
It was some depth. Yeah, that's the problem. The foundation is blank. It's always blank. So I like having to build up. That's the thing I like about it.
Just get an American Airlines flyover. This morning, the first one that flew by scared the crap out of me. She was so close.
Oh. Oh, here comes another camera. Rick.
So it was, we looked it up online, camels and a dairy horse. And it's a camel writing competition, and like call them out to give camel writing, which we were like, oh, and a dairy horse.
Population, I think it was 813 and at least 5 camels. So we were like, that's a pretty high camel population.
But a popular place to eat because they must have had those orders because everyone was stopping and going in for lunch.
I have this woman texting me. She's bought the virtual class and she wants to know why she can't access the class yet.
Did you tell her it hasn't started
No.
yet?
Yes, I haven't started. Oh. Ah. Oh, so we're not logged in yet?
It is. I'm trying to figure out why it's not. I've done something to do with it.
Oh.
Change that one from not listed to listed.
And I just realized I said that, and he said he was recording me. Well,
That was almost like a bad scratch.
you'll edit that out, right?
Just for the lack word.
I'm going to turn off my phone. I can't answer. It's not my event. I'm just the teacher. Uh, yes, all about patches.
Double checking.
Uh,
One of my clients, and I kind of put them off with there, and then I thought, well, as far as I know, nobody, but, he's been digitized for a couple of years. We've done a lot of conversation about different machines and what to look for. He had a shop right on the street in his name is Rich Lewis. His wife's shop is educational toys. Like he did the COVID shut it down. So he moved everything over to and said that she's got plenty of room to keep adding machines, so I'm assuming he's got plenty of room. But he does a lot of military tackles and stuff, and he also does a lot of show. I don't think I have any on my so this stick I have is I used to use my tablet to take only
Best of my knowledge, everything's going out the way it's supposed to.
okay, and if it's not? They're telling me content's not available for people logging into Eventbrite, but I don't know what they're doing. I don't know what that is. We are recording it, correct? So that even if it's not live, we will be able to upload it or something. Someone is recording, correct? Okay. I'm not stressing. As long as it's recording.
don't have it. There's a picture that of a patch that we did together on Instagram, and then for one of the shows there.
But
Everything I'm doing is telling me it's correct.
Okay, but it is recording locally to your drive.
I'm recording it to, it's recording on Vimeo, and it's also recording on my YouTube channel.
Okay, so we have access to content. So we're not stressing about it. We are gonna go for the class, and I'm gonna start, and they'll deal with it. Yes.
And we can upload it.
Excellent. So we just need to let Mandy know exactly that, so she can go and tell whoever needs to know, because they're going to get bombarded with questions down at the thing. And it's fine. It is what it is.
Okay, excellent. Thank you.
All right, guys, are we about ready? Yeah. Oh, it's about 2 o'clock here. And as expected, always, this is cutting edge technology here. Seriously, I've never participated in an event before that has attempted to do a live stream broadcast of a class at the same time as teaching a class. That's pretty, yes, they do it on TV all the time. They're not doing it at an embroidery conference. That's not set up like a TV studio, okay? So, and going through wireless to do it broadcasting. They have bazillions of dollars of equipment and dedicated service. So there is a little bit of technical glitches going on, but we are embroiderers. We know how to make it happen, and we are going to roll with the punches. So it's now 2 o'clock, 2:01, and we are doing the very first virtual live all about patches class at the Applique Getaway. I'm just going to get started. My name is Lisa Shaw, and I've been doing machine embroidery for over 25 years. And as all things are cyclical, it seems like patches are really coming back in style. And so that's why I thought, well, let's do a class on patches. So basically, what are they? If you've never stitched or done a patch before, they are basically freestanding embroidery designs, very similar to applique, except you're not stitching them onto something necessarily until after they're completed. All of you would have gotten the free designs that we gave. This is the glue that I like to use because it doesn't have fumes. It's got a lot. E6000 is the most popular one. It's wonderful for attaching patches. However, you can, that it smells a lot. So I prefer to use this type of glue. There's a website called hookandloop.com for those that are looking for the Velcro. That Velcro is the nice term for hook and loop. They actually sell it so that you can attach the patches, which is great for when you want to remove them, place them back on. Good for name badges and the military type patches. So when I am making my patches, I don't leave them raw. I will always put that heat patch on the back of it to finish them no matter what. It just gives it a nice feel and it becomes patch-like. Otherwise, they're too flimsy. And then if you're not using a proper material, you'll get the waffles like you do with the appliques. They just don't wear as nice. So I do use the heat patch, but I usually either glue, hand sew, or fuse them in place. Now, what can you make patches on? Pretty much anything. There are no patch police that are requiring you to use specific materials. However, most commonly you'll find that they sell a patch material, and that's what's in this kit, is a polyester twill. The reason that's nice is because it melts. So when you stitch a patch on fabric and you trim away the fabric afterwards, you can actually take that hot knife or a soldering iron or a cigarette lighter and kiss the twill, and it actually sucks in so you get a nice smooth edge on your patches. So polyester is very common, and that's used by most of the commercial embroiderers. It comes in a variety of colors, but it's not rainbows of colors. I mean, you're not going to find all the Pantone colors, or you're not going to find all the various thread colors because it's done by its fabric. Some people like to make their patches out of felt. I find that it doesn't last as long. Felt is a fibrous material, and it does where I don't personally like the look of it, but there's nothing wrong with stitching it on felt. When I say reinforced cotton, I mean cotton that has either interfacing or some sort of reinforcement on the back of it so that it's a little stiffer. Just remember, if you use a natural fiber, it could fray if you don't have the edges completely cut and covered. They do sell a simulated stitched fabric. So it's actual fabric that looks like it's been embroidered. My only issue with it, because I think it looks wonderful, is that you can get a lot of deflection from small fonts. And that's because it's got a texture to it. So if you're doing small fonts on it, you really have to compensate and make those fonts a little bit wider, which doesn't look right in your software, but when it stitches, they actually get pulled in. So it's lovely fabric, but it's just, once you learn the technique on how to get your stitches to work right on it, then you're good. It's just hard to get that way. Some of the patches that were going around that you've seen were stitched just with thread. So there's no fabric involved in those. They were stitched on either water-soluble stabilizer or stitched on poly mesh or nylon mesh. The nice thing about stitching on poly mesh or nylon mesh is that you can melt them, so you don't have to worry about it. But if you stitch on water-soluble stabilizer, like I have this love patch that was here, was done on water-soluble stabilizer. What's nice is that you can use just a little bit of water. You trim around it and just use a little water, and the water-soluble goes away. The problem with doing just a thread type patch is that it does take a lot of time to stitch. However, you have perfect color matches. There's so many more colors of thread that are available. You can match anything completely, no matter what color it is that you want to use it for it. Now, when you are stitching with, lost my train of thought. The reason that you can stitch these on water-soluble stabilizer when you're just using thread is that the background that the stitches are being laid on, like the wording is being laid on, is freestanding. So that's like freestanding lace, which means you just have to make sure whatever is in your hoop is strong enough, fibrous enough, taut enough in your hoop to contain those stitches. Using one layer of solvay that you normally put as a topping on a towel is not going to work. You need to use either a fibrous water-soluble stabilizer, Badge Master, which is the very thick water-soluble stabilizer. I know people that stitch on plastic from tablecloths. It works perfectly fine because the stitches on this type of thread, they're freestanding. They hold themselves. So there's just a lot of options that you can do for these. Now, nylon mesh is a little bit different than poly mesh stabilizer. I found mine, I think it was at allstitch.com, if I'm not mistaken. I'd have to check that link. But the reason I like the nylon mesh for doing these is that it has a lower melting point, so that I don't have to put the heat source along the edges so long, because nylon melts faster than polyester does. But it looks pretty much the same. It's just nylon as opposed to polyester. Now, one thing that you can do when if you are using twill as a backing, and this is the size of this patch, and this has a polyester twill as the backing, you can put a light fill of stitches on top of it, which can give you a simulation of doing a full thread version, but takes a hell of a lot less time, because it's just there's no underlay. It's basically just a shading, which can be used for artistic reasons. I mean, think about it. If you have, this is the patch, this was going on the back of a mortarboard for a graduation type thing. And if you wanted to match school colors and do a gradient from one color into the next color, you can't buy twill that's going to have those two colors, but you can put a light fill in your embroidery design. So it's just one more option on how you can do that. Let's see, is that going to play? Yes. This was the patch that I had shown in the video that has a light sketch fill on top of it with a layer of mylar underneath it. So that gives you sparkle without having to use metallic threads in your embroidery. How many of you like to use metallic threads in your embroidery? Once you know the trick and you can get your machine to work on it, they're fabulous. But it takes a while, and using just a mylar, sheet of mylar in the back of it, it will add the sparkle without having to add the extra care that it takes for putting metallic thread on your machine. Now, when you are doing a sketch fill for anything to put mylar, I like my densities to be 1.2 to 1.4 millimeters. And by the way, you guys know that you have all these notes as handouts, correct? They're all in the app that you can download for them. So I'm glad that you are taking notes, but these are the notes that you get from this class. So there's quite a few pages with pictures on them. But the density that I use is usually about 1.4 is my magic number that I put on for mylar. It's enough to hold it in place, enough to let the shine sparkle through, and give a little bit of a look that does it. Now, running out. On that, as I mentioned, when you are using a faux stitched fabric that's at the background, when you are doing small lettering, you do need to add compensation because this is a textured fabric. And the stitches can either sink in or they get kind of pulled over, so they're not as crisp. So I usually tend to use an edge run underlay with them so that I do get a running stitch, and I do increase my compensation so that the stitches can fill in on that whatsoever as they need to be. Patch fabric, which is the polyester twill fabric that has that patch, it has the heat and bond fusible that's placed on it. Like I said, that is the most popular. It is nice because that backing that is on the polyester fabric makes sure that it is stiff and you don't get any distortion when cutting it, because a lot of times I will pre-cut my patches using my scan and cut silhouette cutter type unit. So when especially if you're cutting out intricate shapes, it's a lot easier for me to pre-cut all of my shapes ahead of time rather than trying to cut them in the hoop. Just makes it easier for me. Now, when you do use your pre-cut shapes, whether you're cutting them by hand with scissors, which is easy enough to do, all you have to do is print out a template sheet that has that running stitch place line. Some people will even put in a hoop a piece of cardstock and stitch the placement line, trim that out, and now you have a template to pre-cut and trace all the shapes for your patches. So there's lots of high-tech and low-tech ways of getting those pre-cut shapes done. But when you are using the backing on your fabric, whether it's the patch or the heat and bond light, just like when you do appliques, it makes it just a little bit sturdy enough so that when you are doing your placement lines on your stabilizer and placing your pre-cut shapes in there and fusing into place, because it's nice and stable, they match dead balls on, and you don't have to worry about things being hung off of the edge and stretching. So that fusible on the back of your fabric has more than one job. It has the job of adding the stability, and it has the job of being fusible. Hopefully that makes sense. Now if you have a cutting machine or you want to pre-cut your shapes, as I mentioned, we have using the cutting machine, using your placement line as the cutting line for your silhouette or for your scan and cut. You can also just, as I mentioned, hoop the patch fabric and stitch the placement lines. If there's anyone interested in getting information on using a laser cutter, because they're getting to be more available for the homes, I don't have one yet, but I mentioned it to my friend Jeff Fuller at mbnerd.com. He is more than happy to be a source of reference for you if you're looking for information on laser cutting. And one more gizmo that we need for the house. But can you imagine using a laser cutter to pre-cut applique shapes or patches? It's when he tells me about how he's cutting them on his laser cutter, it is precise, fast. It makes me think I need one. But but he was generous enough. For those of you that are on social media, mbnerd, that's embnerd.com, and they have a Facebook page. It's a great group for getting technical information about the commercially side of embroidery. So I like to promote websites that are capable of giving tech support type answering questions that way. Another style of patches is this raggy applique type style. Now, if you are pre-cutting this shape for attaching it to create this style patch and you want to pre-cut them, as opposed to using that placement line at the exact size, you'll want to go 3 or 4 millimeters larger so that when you attach it with your satin stitch, your running stitch, your bean stitch, however you want to do it, you can beat up the edges with your wire brush to give it that raggy applique. If you don't give it enough overlap, you're not going to have enough oomph to make it look raggy. This one in particular, the colored fabric is the patch, and the white or the cream color that's underneath it is called Ozenberg. Ooh, that was fast. Ozenberg fabric, which is like a chenille type fabric. It's a very loose weave, and you can layer underneath, and it really beats it up and gets it fluffy if you're looking for that real raggy look. Rayon will also do a very similar look in more colors, but it depends on the style that you're going for. This distressed look can be in all sorts of, it's kind of on trend right now, is the raggy applique for patches. They are, patch was attached to the hat with the E6000 glue. Even though it looks like it was hand stitched on, this is just a decorative bean stitch that is going around the whole edge of it. And then you had the 2 or 3 millimeters edges along the back, so that that's all created, washed, beat up with the wire brush, and then glued on. Don't try beating it up once it's on the hat. Ask me how I know that one. Now, it's okay to trim your applique by hand in the hoop. When you're doing patches, the first stitch that's going to go through is your placement, which tells you where to put the fabric. Place your fabric on top of it and carefully trim around. Just remember to use your sharp pointed scissors so that when you are getting close to that fabric, this is water soluble stabilizer here. So you want to make sure that this satin stitch that's going over it, which is typically 4 millimeters, is going to be completely covering it. So when it has details such as points or dips, you'll want to make sure you trim close. My tip when using your scissors to trim is try not to, I use scissors that have a slightly blunted point because I want to make sure that I don't stab or mutilate my fabric that I'm stitching on with the water soluble stabilizer. So you don't want to be pushing it down and trying to hook your scissors underneath it, because once you distort this stable fabric, everything else is just gone. Okay, so you want to keep everything as stabilized as possible. Now, when I'm talking about edges, there's traditionally 2 types of edging. Typically, we have a satin stitch. That's how we've always done our patches, especially if they're a shaped type patch. There's any type of dense border stitch. Some people use a motif stitch. There's also brand new from Embrilliance, or relatively new, what we call the marrow edge, which looks similar to what was created by a marrow machine. A marrow machine is something, if you've ever gone to a motorcycle shop that's making the patches there, that's the only place I've ever seen it. It's like an overlocker, like a surging machine. And it basically, you step on the gas and these guys go 90 miles an hour and zing around the patch, and you have a slight tail that is come off. They don't worry about perfect edges, but it has a locking stitch that's kind of fanned in and almost like a running stitch that goes around the edge. So in the Brilliance software, they have added a feature in Stitch Artist Level 3 that creates a simulated marrow edge stitch. Other programs also have a motif run, so check your software to see if that is have that ability if you aren't using the Brilliance programs. I really should check my time here. Oh, I'm like flying through because I'm not waiting for, no one's asking questions and I'm already halfway through my class. Do we have any questions so far while I'm here? Because the one thing that's unusual about a virtual class is they're kind of expecting you guys to ask the questions they're thinking of at home. So, you have a question here?
So, like, when you have that sticky stuff on the back, does it mess up your machine? Or
The
stuff that's like, oh, you put that on after?
You put that on after.
Oh, okay.
Once your design is completely done and taken out and trimmed and melted, then you fuse it on.
Melissa,
yes.
just for the audience back home, repeat the questions back because I don't know that they're picking that up.
Oh, very good.
Just for people back home that may not.
Perfect. Okay, the question was, when you are using the patch, the heat seal for the patch, which is the iron-on material, that is put on after the design has been created so that it seals the back of the design and can be attached to something else. I actually have it whoopsie. I have a little one that's been, I actually ironed it onto the back of a pot holder to see, because normally when we iron on our embroidery, we iron from the back side. I know when you're ironing it onto a backpack pocket, you're not going to be able to iron on the back side. But I wanted to see how much heat I could get through to make that heat patch stuff stick. So I put this heat on it and I used my heat press to fuse it through this thing, and it actually did a pretty decent job of being attached. Could I rip it off? Absolutely, if you're sitting there and you're pulling it off. But normal wear and tear, putting it on a hat like this, that's not going to work. So you need a lot of heat. Make sure you read the instructions on whatever the heat patch is. But I'm pretty impressed with how well this is affixed using that heat seal stuff. So, yes, question.
The marrow stitch, how did they come to use the marrow stitch on patches? Does it offer some benefit for durability or strength? And then, or is it because they had a marrow machine and they said, oh, what a good idea, we'll put this on the edge?
Well, I'm actually not sure about that part of the history of it, but it is a finishing edge. And the way that they were probably trying to create something for durability, and a satin stitch just wasn't doing it. So like when any of you that do serger work, you know that when you do a rolled hem, you're getting a nice dense, but it's also putting a needle point in. So it's basically like a rolled hem edge on this, except it's not rolling it through.
Is it two threads?
No, no, it's just one.
Oh, okay.
So, but that's how that machine
Okay.
works. So it's different.
Yeah.
But it's just become so traditional that everyone expects that marrow edge to be on a patch.
Right.
Yes.
Do you ever sew the satin stitch on to apply the patch to whatever you're putting on?
Question is, do you ever stitch the satin stitch as the attachment stitch to put it on something? Well, could you? I don't see, you can't. You can. There's no reason why you couldn't. It'd be like taking a fabric, like fussy cutting something out of a piece of fabric and then using it as an applique. So could you use a satin stitch and attach it? Sure. It's not going to actually look like a patch. It's going to look more like an applique though, because that satin stitch is going to fall on, it's going to be attached rather than having a sewn stitch. That's usually when you're attaching it by machine. you're doing either a blanket stitch, sorry, you know, around the outside edge and hooking in. That's how I've seen some people do it. Whenever I've done it, I've just used a straight stitch and I go right along that satin border doing that. So it's almost like you're hiding it in that marrowed edge type thing. So your edge of your patch is always lifted up off the fabric. So it looks more like a patch. If you just used a satin stitch, it would look like an applique. That's a great question though. So
I've seen that done on, for heavy stitched designs
mm-hmm.
on like polo shirts, so it's not so heavy on the shirt.
Yes. So creating patches or creating
The applique patch on the shirt with the satin stitch to attach it.
Oh, that would be so Ramona's saying that she has seen patches attached to polo shirts with a satin stitch attachment, so that it doesn't really look like a patch, but you're putting a lot less stress on that polo shirt.
Yes.
But it's also not going to come off, so the guy who's bought that shirt and now wants to put something else on the shirt on top of it, too bad, he's got a patch. So sorry, I just had a question maybe a week or so ago about someone who was doing basically the same thing. They got a bunch of company shirts that they wanted to cover over the logos that were there. So if it's a patch, you ain't going to do that. So now one thing to keep in mind, if you are going to be doing a satin stitch motif on it, you try and keep it about 4 millimeters width. That will give you a more beefier look to your patch if you're doing a satin stitch. This one, my little Gracie patch here, this is only 3 millimeters. Okay, and it really, a satin stitch can really shrink. You know, satin stitches are the strongest stitches in your arsenal. So they have a lot of pull. And if you don't have a lot of underlay underneath that satin stitch, it will pull in and shrink. So this almost looks like a 2 millimeter because all I did was a satin stitch going around it. I did not put any underlay underneath this satin stitch. Okay, so it gave it more of a rounded look. If you want to have it be fatter and be more pronounced, your satin stitch, make sure you do a zigzag underlay. So normally it's just going to give more rebar so that you have a satin stitch, a zigzag going one direction, coming back, and then the satin comes over it, which will make your satin stitches look wider. You'll find that when you have a marrow stitch, it already has that in it so that it does have that beefy look. Cool. Now, as I said, the width of the marrow stitch, this was designed to be mimicking what a marrow machine does. If you can sort of see blown up here, there's little groupings of stitches. So it's a lot higher density than your typical satin stitch. It's not as dense as for 3D foam coverage, but it is a dense stitch and it's in clumps. And then they're anchored so that you're not having just a big clump of stitches. So the marrow stitch will work very nicely, and you'll find this even with your satin stitches around outside corners, but as soon as you get into shaped corners that have interior corners, just think if you're on a serger, how would you do an interior corner with a rolled hem? It's a little difficult. So the stitches will kind of overlap each other, and I want to say look messier, but that's the nature of the beast. There's no way to solve that unless there's no way to solve it because a marrow machine, this is what it would look like if you had a marrow machine. So they didn't fix it to make it look like you have an embroidery machine. They created the stitch so it looks like you did it with an expensive marrow machine. Does that make sense? Yes. As long as I'm not putting anybody to sleep here. Because that kind of happens at times. Now, it's Stitch Artist. This is, we have this is our program layout, and I'm looking at Stitch Artist level 3. And the button that I'm referring to here is the edge button here. And it's basically a stitch type. So when you have whatever on your screen here and you would draw a shape that you want to go around it, click on the Marrow Edge, and you have your properties on which allows you to choose what type of stitching do you want. Do you want to have it to cut it with your hot knife after the whole thing is stitched? Do you want to pre-cut your shapes? Do you want to hand cut it in your hoop like an applique? Do you want to fill that with fill stitches to make it a freestanding patch? Or do you want to add a light fill, which will let you do the gradient shadings like Mylar additions to it? If any of you have been following the InBrilliance website, today they have announced that they have a brand new program. It is called Merrily Interactives. And it is a new function that is added underneath the utility menu right above or right near the knockdown stitching. But this is a new program that is currently available. And in fact, I have to switch out of the software here because I can't do this. I can't do the rest of the show without showing it. So the way that it works is I have my patch design that I've created. I brought in designs, I put some lettering in it. This is the patch that someone wants. So all I need to do is go to my utility menu, say add patch edge, and the options are, do I want to create a rectangle, a circle, or do I want to what we call page wrap, which means wrap whatever is on the page into a patch. So when I choose that option, it just creates my patch. And in my interactive part here, you'll notice these are the colors, and there's a button that says interactive. That's where I can click on here and choose what do I want to stitch. Do I want to cut it when this is just the options that I'd given you before. And it does them all. So if I want to say using a fill, and I can go to my colors, and I can change my colors to anything that I want them to be in the backgrounds. Let me put a nice blue color because we can. And that was the wrong thing. There we go. This one's, which one am I doing? Here we go. If I wanted to do this as a fabric fill, boom, done, save my stitch file. In addition to that function, which is click, poof, done, you are also provided with 28 fonts that are native fonts. They are listed under Merrily, and they include small. So we have for 60 weight thread, for a mini, which is micro fonts, which is for those of you that want 3 and 4 millimeter fonts. So we have, these are the typical ones that are used a lot in patches, the military type fonts. So different styles, there's block, there's Army, there's Coast, like Coast Guard, there's police. And then they have some fun fonts in here, like the Groovy at the Getaway, the one that I used that way. That is one of them. They have one that's a blackboard, which is kind of like kids writing. Bonnie, which is like pirates. Whole bunch of, there's 28, and these are all native fonts, which means for those of you that have Stitch Artist 3, you have access to all the object information. You can turn on nearest connecting points. You can adjust them. You can do anything that you want with them. In addition to 28 native fonts, you also get under the library, it's going to take a while to load, a new library collection called Merrily, which contains over 150 patch shapes to include those that have the rocker boards on top and the bottom for creating military type patches, as well as shoulder tabs, the varsity patches for high school teams, crosses for police, firemen, anything that you're into as far as if you're doing commercial work and you're doing local groups that need those type of patches, different styles of shields, as well as a collection of pre-made designs that were digitized that are able to be added to like the bowling pin with the name, the bugle like I showed with that Sheila in it, and etc. Yes?
Sizable?
Yes. Are they sizable? These are native object-based formats. So not only are they sizable, let me go and I'm going to let me just select the bugle here, put him in here. These in particular come with the name already placed in it. So all you have to do is go up here to letters and change the name to whatever it is you want, choose the font, whatever you want, etc. The ones, let me go into a different patch here and take in one of the plainer ones so that we can actually see it a little easier. Pick that one. Why not? When let me see, make sure I'm in Stitch Artist 3. Yes. Right click on it, convert to objects, and this allows you to completely customize it any way you want. So if I really wanted this part to be a curve on top because that's their logo shape, I can grab the little edge here, whoops, pull it up, da-da-da, make this curved, so that you have complete customization of any of those built-in shapes, and they still have the properties for the patches. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. Yes.
So this Merrily is a separate
Yes.
module, and then do you have to have one of the Stitch Artists or Stitch Artist 3 in order to use Merrily?
The question is Merrily a separate module? Yes, it is completely standalone, so you don't need anything to run it. You can just run it by itself. If you only get it by itself, you get the 28 fonts, you get the patches, and you can merge in designs, but you can't do any resizing with designs that you bring in from someplace else, because that's an essentials function. You can add this to essentials so that you now have all the essentials functions plus this function. You don't need any Stitch Artists to do with this unless you want to add digitizing. And if you have Stitch Artist 3, of course, you have a lot more. It's really a companion for that, but it's anyone that wants to make patches and just has essentials, this is, well, you don't need digitizing program. This is just what it has. Now, those of you that are watching virtually, this is available to you with the Applique Getaway code. We have a coupon that's going out in the virtual goodie bag. That's AG21EMB. Those of you that are here at the show, we have it available in our booth at a rockin' hot show special price. No, I'll tell you the retail on this is $199. Okay, and that includes 28 native fonts. So just think that's 3 collections of fonts. That's $150 worth of fonts right there. Then you have all the library shapes, plus you have the tool to wrap any design and turn it into a patch. But so those of you that are watching virtually, it's the retail price $199 minus your 10% discount off of we're using the AG21EMB promo code. But those of you here, come see us in the booth.
Okay.
Well, because I'm a dealer while I'm here at the show. So I represent In Brilliance, I sell In Brilliance, but yes?
Is that you have a booth?
I have, it's In Brilliance booth. I run the booth that says In Brilliance on it. Here at the Applique Getaway. Show special pricing.
I like show special pricing.
Excuse me?
I said I like show special.
Yes, we all like show special pricing. Okay, any other questions while I'm here? Yes? Okay, the question is, if you choose a shape and you want it to be stitched for polyester twill and you want it to be like an applique, do you have to add the placement stitch, or does it already put the placement stitch in for you? Well, let me get rid of this page here and we'll just do this. Don't save. Don't save. New one. We're going to bring in a shape from the library. We'll choose this heart. Click OK. And where we have our let me think of this through. I'm just trying to figure out, why do I not have access to the interactive shape right here? What? Why don't I have access to the interactive stuff right here? Because I'm in a hands-on class live. That is why we don't. You know, it always happens. I'll have to pretend this is that shape. Because it's supposed to come in and say interactive right here when I brought in that shape. For whatever reason, it didn't. When you go to interactive, you have the option to choose, do you want a position stitch or don't you want a position stitch? Okay, so this shape here has that already in it. So if you are cutting it by hand, you would want it because you need to know where to put the fabric. If you are putting pre-cuts down, you want that position stitch there as well too, because you want to know where those pre-cuts are created from. Okay? Live classes. Any other questions?
I want to ask you about using pre-cut shapes.
Uh-huh.
If you're using a pre-cut shape, do you find that my borders don't always line up on a pre-cut shape?
Your borders do not always line up on a pre-cut shape. And when you say borders don't line up, you've cut your fabric, you've stitched your placement, you've put the pre-cut in there, and there's gaps. Is that what you're saying?
But before that, remember, you stitch your design on top of your fabric. Okay, here's what I do. I stitch out the bodies of all my patches with a cut line.
Okay, so I'm going to repeat this so that we get it that way. So you're stitching out, you have a big hoop of fabric, and you have all your patches that are stitched with cutting lines going around them, like running stitches.
Yep, and then I cut them all out.
Then you cut them all out.
Then I lay in my wash-away stabilizer.
Wash-away stabilizer.
Placement line.
Placement line.
Patch.
On top.
And then border.
And then you put the border on it.
And it doesn't always line up.
But the pre-cut is fitting in the stitched line.
Sometimes it's a little smaller.
Okay, if it's a little small, then you had shrinkage when you stitched the patches. So you're going to have...
I guess ultimately my question is, how much compensation for that shrinkage?
Depends on what compensation for the shrinkage. It depends on how much stitches are on there to begin with. I mean, you're not going to be able to give a blanket number of 5%. Although,
that would be nice.
you know, whenever I've done my pre-cuts, so basically what I've done, I have a 8x12 frame, and I have 6 little patches that are in there that are already embroidered, and they have a running stitch around them, and now I want to turn them into patches because I want to stitch them on wash-away stabilizer. When I find if they are full threads, like lots of a logo and lettering, I will, the material that I'm stitching on has to be well stabilized in the first place. So it's normally what I'm using is a denim or a canvas, so there really is no stretch. It could be that the fabric you're using in the hoop to do that is getting pulled in too much. So I would put more stabilizer on that and see if that makes a difference. Because for every time I've done mine, they've been dead balls on.
I'm coming to your place.
But I also have a tendency of over-stabilizing things when I know there's going to be a problem. I have no problem if I'm doing a patch and it's on denim, I'm using SF101 Pellon interfacing on the back of it. I don't care, it's a patch. So, and that's going to make sure it doesn't move.
Okay.
You know, I do the same when I work with silk dupioni if I'm doing a pillow for my couch. I don't want no puckering, so I put SF101 101 on the back of it because it is spam risk. Because it's upholstery. Because that, you know, you don't want, when you're doing heavy embroidery for something that's upholstery, that thing better be stable that you're stitching on. If I'm doing heavy embroidery on a slinky t-shirt, I need to choose a different embroidery design because that's not the proper embroidery design for that. So my first suggestion would be trying to stabilize better the original patches in that hoop.
Okay.
Just making sure there's nothing
Shifting.
shifting going on because that's what needs to just happen.
Okay.
That would be my suggestion. Yes.
Okay, so when she's cutting out the fabric that she's done her stitch on, do you cut right on the stitch? Or are you cutting outside of it just a little bit?
Okay, when I do mine, okay, my order of operations, I stitch all the inside stuff first, and the last thing that stitches is that placement stitch. So if there was any shrinking going on, that placement stitch didn't move. Because the placement stitch is the last one. So yes, I cut dead balls on, right on that line, because basically I'm stitching on fabric. It's just a running stitch. Could that be the thing too?
I was just,
Could that be the thing?
I was just thinking that because I'll make my shape and then I'll put my stuff on the inside and then I'll cut and paste.
So it could be pulling. Yeah. I'm so glad we have a live question here. Could have solved that problem. And did you have one?
Have you ever made a patch out of leather? And if so, what kind of stabilizer did you use on the back of it?
My experience with leather is limited. I have done a few patches. It was more on a suede material, so not like ultra suede. It was a leather suede. I had to be really careful with my choice of stitches that went on it because it's not woven. When you stitch leather, you're putting holes in it. So if you put too many stitches in it, it will perforate. So it's more important to choose the type of stitches that you're putting on the leather in general, just because you don't want to have it fall through because there's nothing there holding it. As far as stabilizer on the back of it, when in doubt, I use a cutaway. I'm pretty much, if you only can have one type of stabilizer in your stash, it needs to be a cutaway. The only thing you can't stitch with cutaway as a stabilizer is freestanding lace. It will work for everything else, but freestanding lace, it doesn't wash away. Ask me how I know that one, because it looks very much like my poly mesh.
I lick the corner to make sure
you are my tribe. I lick the corner too, and everyone says, "Ew, it's like glue." I'm like, exactly. You know, it's what it is. It tastes bad. Yes.
So in your design that you have up here, what you're saying is your patch would be at the very bottom. I mean, if you were doing it the way that the lady over here was saying,
Yes.
the patch would be that step would be at the very last.
Right. Yes. This is right at the beginning because it has a fabric background.
Okay.
So it's putting those stitches, the gradients, those have to be done. And yes, you would want to reorder them however it is that you need. You want the patch last, patch first. So it just.
Would it help her problem just by moving that step to number 1 instead of having it last?
Yeah, it could. She's going to try that as soon as she gets home.
I am.
I don't. And we want a report, please. I saw a question back. Yes.
Can you go into more detail on how you actually create a ragged edge patch?
More detail on how I create a ragged edge patch. Well, I'm not using this type thing. Okay. A raggedy edge patch is basically applique. So the patch itself is freestanding, so it's really a patch, but it's not going to have a satin border on it. Okay? So when I do mine, I decide, first of all, it's attached usually with some sort of bean stitch or sashiko stitch that's holding it into place, the layers together, but you're leaving enough of a border around the outside of the fabric so that you can beat it up. And when I say beat it up, I mean washing it, making sure there's no stabilizer left in it, taking a toothbrush or a wire brush and scrubbing the edges so that it frays. Because that's what makes the raggedy edge raggedy. If you want to have it be puffy like the one that we had in the picture there, that before I did that, when I did my layers of fabric, so I had my first layer of cotton, and then underneath it, I had 2 layers of the Ossenberg fabric. And then I did my sashiko stitch around it to sandwich those 3 layers together. Then I put that in the wash machine. I trimmed, well, first of all, I trimmed around it with my 4mm edge, put it in the wash machine with all the other ones, dried them. You kind of crinkle them because you want them to be distressed, and then you beat up the corners with a wire brush. I just turn it around and kept spraying the edges, and that makes it fuzzy. I've seen people take scissors and clip, so that also will force the fabric, kind of like a rag quilt. Whatever you can do to force the fibers to become fat, become wild, become raggy looking. It's the style to make it look rough. Does that kind of answer the question? Well, you have to do all that beat up process before you attach them to whatever it is that you're attaching them to.
Otherwise, you're beating up the hat.
Exactly. Otherwise, you're beating up the hat and you're making a mess. And ask me how I know that one. I'm like, you get in the assembly line method and you start putting stuff on. That's when I had done letters, because someone had wanted their monogram done on a picnic tote with that raggy effect, and they wanted 3 separate letters. So it was basically done the same way: large designs, beat them up, and then attach them to the fabric tote. It's just a different style that they want to have for patches. It's a lot easier because patches take a while to sew. That satin stitch edge going all the way around the edge, takes time. So when someone says they want a raggy edge, I'm like, woohoo, that's money in my pocket. Because I can beat up something in front of the TV set, as I make it rough. I will say use more natural fiber fabrics, because cottons, loose weaves, linens, anything that would normally fray, that you would want to serge the edge, works fabulous. I had gotten this really, really cheap stuff from Hobby Lobby that I thought it was so pretty. I love the color. And then I tried to cut a jacket out of it. And as soon as the fabric saw my scissors, it frayed all over the place. So I said, well, we're not making the jacket out of that. That became patch fabric, though, because it became raggy edge for projects. Yes?
Do you use heat bond light on the center part of that raggy patch to give it stability when you wash it, and so it doesn't go totally crazy?
The question is, would I use heat and bond light on the center part of the top part of the patch to give it some body? If I was stitching it on, say, wash away stabilizer, yes, I would. If I was just doing it in a hoop, because normally when I do my raggy patches, I will have more than one in a hoop. So I just have regular stabilizer with the fabric, stitch out the patches as patches, take them out of the hoop, then trim them, then attach them to the other stuff and do the thing. So it's already stable when it's in the hoop. But if you're looking to have the center part cleaner, then yes, make sure that whatever that fabric is in the center is flat. A lot of times that I found that they would rather have the whole thing look distressed. I mean, they're usually putting it on something that has holes in it. I mean, I love it. The jeans, you wouldn't want to put a finished patch on them. They're got the fuzz sticking out of them. So it's the style. Any other questions? Nothing. Nothing. I'm not sure. I have to talk for 15 more minutes, guys. Yes.
Well, would you want to, if you have time to fill in, to talk about the Stitch Artist 3 a little bit more and how it helps with the patches?
Okay, talk a little bit about Stitch Artist 3 and how it helps with the patches. Well, probably the biggest function with Stitch Artist 3, and it basically has to do with working with native objects. See, the beauty about this Merrily Interactive is that it is all created in Embrilliance for Embrilliance. So those that have Stitch Artist 3 have access to everything that exists in there. So whether it is this shape that I just created here on the screen, the function is convert to objects. That, when I click on that, that allows me to, where did it go? Here we go, I have to be in Stitch Artist in order to get access to it. Right click, oops, select this, right click on it, convert it to curves. That allows me to look at this shape and say, you know, even though it has all these little knobbly things on here, do I want to cut those out? You know, do I want to trim each one of those? What if I went and just selected all those and made that a nice curve instead so that it was completely round, not have all that option? Because I can get into, because I have Stitch Artist 3 installed, what I am allowed to do is simply select nodes, hit the delete key, and it allows me to reshape this. So I can, whoopsie, let me grab down here. It's always fun standing on a podium, working in your software with a touchpad. So that is what I would do to make this, first of all, a lot easier for me to cut because I don't have to go around those little funkly things there trying to make all those little bumps smooth. That's one of the benefits of having that. The other big benefit is when you have native fonts, the same thing happens. So here we are in these, let's go. Yes, I know I have quite a few fonts on here. Oh, let's do this guy, Groovy. I just love this font. So because this is a native font, I can right click on it, say convert it to objects, which basically exposes how this font was digitized. So here I have the letter G. That's this first letter, that's the first part of the G here. It has this column stitch. I can actually see that it was branched with the other columns that are listed below it. I have an outline that they've given to it here, so that if I wanted to outline this font, all I have to do is go and click on the outline button, and it will add a running stitch or bean stitch or whatever type of outline that I want to have on this.
Can you change the color?
I can change the color, yes. Whoops, I deleted it.
That was the wrong way.
So here we have in the letter R, if I select this guy and I click on Run Stitch, and I can click on the color, and I can change this to a darker color so that maybe if I want to have it to be a satin stitch, how about that? That'll show up a little more. Ooh, not a 3.5 millimeter one though, maybe a smaller one. So that I can go through and create, and you can do that with any native fonts if you have Stitch Artist 3. You got a question?
Yes.
Yeah.
At the beginning of that answer, you selected the outline and you talked about simplifying it and getting rid of so many of those needle holes.
Mm-hmm.
Will it do the same thing to like select that outline and say create outline, reconstruct outline?
It might. It would, but I don't like to give up control. I have this little issue here, so I don't trust computers. They do bad things, but yes, it might simplify it, but you have to remember that you're better than it is. It's going to try and keep it to have the same shape, so it's not going to make it as smooth as possible. That is one of the options,
I guess
though.
my question was, is that the intent of that functionality, reconstruct outline, is it intended to simplify something?
Yes. The purpose of reconstruct outline is to simplify, but not something that the program itself created. It's as if you were to bring in an SVG file from someplace else that was when it has like 5 billion nodes. That's its job, is to fix what somebody else didn't do correctly. Yes?
You talked about compensation and 5%.
Uh-huh.
What is it on the program that you would adjust that, and how does that work?
Okay, when you have a lettering object, let me go back. Let me go to one that is a little bit smaller here. Here's this one here. When you have your lettering selected, when you go to the stitch properties, there's a little button here that says compensation, and when you increase your compensation, watch what happens to the letters. Do you see how they're getting fatter on the screen? So that's what when I said I would increase by a certain percentage or a certain number of points. This is doing points here because it's part of the lettering tool. It's actually making the stitches wider, which is compensating for whatever they're stitching on because they're going to shrink in. I use this a lot when I'm working on napped fabrics, like velour or towels, and your satin stitches are kind of getting sucked in, a lot of people will add a knockdown stitch. This is also another option. Okay, just makes them fatter, and it will, so that they can actually stitch on the textured fabric.
And what was that mode?
This is on a native font. If you go to the stitch tab, it's under compensation. It lets you make your letters fatter.
So would a good use of that be if you're doing a copy paste and then a border? Say your tatami stitch is so tight that the border doesn't match anymore. You could adjust that.
Your tatami stitch is so tight so it doesn't match anymore.
The border. Yeah.
The border. That's usually a stabilizer issue. I wouldn't be adjusting that in software. Okay, that'd be my first choice. Yes?
And the marrow edge it's a fixed width, right?
Yes, and the marrow machine is a fixed width stitch. They only make one machine and it's got one stitch. That's what we're simulating. So
So I wouldn't be able to take that stitch and make it 5 millimeters wide.
no, you can't adjust the stitch. Not on the marrow edge at this time. It wouldn't be a marrow edge if it was a different size stitch. It's just like we have a chain stitch in Stitch Artist as well, and it's mimicking the chain stitch machine, which only has one width, one size. So if you wanted it to be smaller, that would be a motif.
Okay.
Okay, so you can in Stitch Artist 3 you can create your own motifs, and you can make them any width you want. So you could probably mimic that, but it wouldn't be the edge.
Okay.
Any other questions? Yes?
So I hear a lot about Stitch Artist 3.
Uh-huh.
And I'm just getting into this with my wife. And we have Stitch Artist 1.
Yes.
So is there a big difference between Stitch Artist 1 and Stitch Artist 3?
The question is if there's a big difference between Stitch Artist 1 and Stitch Artist 3. Well, it all starts with the number of buttons. Okay? When you have Stitch Artist 1, Stitch Artist 1 was designed for someone who's getting into it, doesn't know if they want to digitize, they want to get their feet wet, they want to learn the basics of manual punch digitizing and get successful results by learning the basics and getting things done right without getting overwhelmed with the number of buttons. You have a way of bringing in JPEG images, you have drawing tools, and you have stitch types. When you go to Stitch Artist 2, that's probably one of the biggest jumps, because Stitch Artist 2, they're kind of expecting that you know what you're doing already. It's for someone who has been digitizing or wants to work with satin columns. The satin column tool is probably the most powerful tool in digitizing, and it takes the most time to learn how to use effectively because satins are the strongest stitch. They're like little soldiers playing tug of war, and you have one on that side with a thread and one on this side, and they are pulling into each other, and you get puckers. So if you don't know how to draw those satin columns properly and connect them so you don't have gobbledygooks in the corners and you have to overlap them, that's all. That tool, the ability to draw satin columns, is a Stitch Artist Level 2 tool. They've also added other cool features to the rest of the stitchers, such as gradients and feathering and 3D foam. And so they've made it beefier, but it has more buttons on the top, which include the satin column functions, but it's a full-feature digitizer, but it's more than what Level 1 is. Level 3 is for someone who's really going into professional or really wants the bells and whistles and is starting to, it just has more. But if you get, I'll tell you, when I started digitizing 25 years ago, and there was no YouTube, no Facebook, no embroidery events, and I saw the software they had available back then, it was like, whoo, I don't know this, I can't do this. But so they limited the features and the functions so you don't have to get overwhelmed with them. So this is level 3. It has more ways of opening graphics, has different visualizing, it has time-saving generation tools, another type of drawing functions in it, stitch types, the edge, and then all of the pathing and graphical operators that are worked in here. So they've taken it one step further so that you don't have to keep using graphic software in your digitizing software. Does that kind of explain it?
Do you add, I mean, I know there are self-standing modules in general within Brilliant, so are each of the stitch artists self-standing as well? So you just go straight to 3 or you go straight to 3?
Yes, you can. If you have no stitch artist, you can go right to 1, right to 3, whatever. If you have 1, you can upgrade to 3. Okay. And it's the price difference. Yeah. So they don't penalize you. So for those that start with level 1 and they've outgrown level 1, I usually suggest just go to level 2 unless you know there's a reason why you need to be at level 3. Why should you spend all that money to go to a higher level if you don't need that? I mean, that's...
So that's a good question.
If you're happy as a clam at level 1...
If you're at level 1,
Mm-hmm.
which I am.
Yep.
Would it be better to just go to level 2 or go straight to level 3?
It depends what functions you're looking for.
Does level 3 not have all the functions?
Level 3 has everything. You want the whole shebang, go to level 3.
How much does level 3 cost?
You have to ask me in the booth. I'm in teaching mode. I don't remember prices. I no clue. I am an educator by heart. It's really hard for me to remember prices. I had to memorize $199 for Merrily Interactives before I started this class, because otherwise I'd be like, I don't know. So I'm not a salesperson. I don't believe, if you don't need it, don't buy it. And if you don't know why you want it, then you don't need it. But where we have the booth, we have a demo machine set up there, computers. Hopefully everything's working, knock on wood. So we'll be able to answer any questions that you guys have down there. Yes. Okay, we've got 3 minutes, and I've got to go run down to the next class. Thank you so much for joining us for Patches. Have a great show.